The air inside the Tokyo dojo was thick with anticipation. Rows of martial artists stood shoulder to shoulder, black belts from every corner of Japan, waiting to meet the man they had only seen in movies and magazines. Steven Seagal, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple black jai. Seagal entered the room without a word. His presence alone silenced everyone. He didn't need to command attention, he was attention. One by one, the students bowed. Cameras clicked. The master of Aikido had arrived to teach about control, precision, and calmness, not brute strength. But in the back of the room stood one man who wasn't impressed. A young black belt from another dojo, confident, proud, and a little too eager to prove himself. He had trained for years in hard, aggressive styles. He'd watched Seagal's movies and believed it was all just Hollywood choreography. As Seagal demonstrated basic techniques with his students, the young man crossed his arms, whispering to his friends, "He's not even breaking a sweat. This isn't real fighting." His friends smirked nervously. They knew where this was going. Then, in front of the entire class, the young man stepped forward. He bowed briefly, then said loudly, "Sensei Seagal, may I attack you? For fun?" The room froze. Every head turned. You could hear the mat squeak as people shifted, unsure what would happen next. Seagal looked at him, calm, unreadable. No anger, no ego, just silence. Then with a slow nod, he removed his glasses and said softly, "Go ahead." A shiver went through the room. The challenger smiled, confident, almost cocky. He didn't realize that in the next few seconds he would experience something he would never forget. Students backed up, forming a circle around the mat. The air felt electric, like a storm was about to hit. The young black belt adjusted his stance, ready to prove himself, and as he took his first step toward Steven Seagal, the dojo held its breath. What happened next left everyone in that dojo completely silent. The dojo fell into complete silence. The young black belt tightened his belt, rolled his shoulders, and grinned. He thought this was going to be a light-hearted spar, a chance to impress his peers by taking on a movie star. But Steven Seagal wasn't smiling. He stood still, hands relaxed, posture straight, eyes calm but focused. He didn't bow again. He didn't even take a fighting stance. He simply looked at the young man and said softly, "Whenever you're ready." The challenger hesitated for half a second, unsure what to make of the man's confidence. Then he lunged forward, fast and sharp, a trained strike aimed right for Seagal's chest. What happened next was almost invisible. Seagal's hand moved like smoke. In one smooth, effortless motion, he redirected the young man's arm, twisted his wrist, and the black belt found himself spinning, his feet leaving the mat before his brain even processed it. He landed hard on his back. Thud. The sound echoed through the dojo. Every student watching felt it vibrate in their chest. Seagal didn't move. He didn't advance. He simply said in that calm, quiet voice, "Never rush with anger. It blinds you." The challenger blinked, embarrassed. He scrambled up quickly, forcing a smirk. "That was a good one," he muttered, trying to laugh it off. But inside something was cracking, his pride. He attacked again. This time faster, more aggressive. A flurry of strikes, kicks, punches, sweeps, but Seagal was barely moving. His steps were small, his timing perfect. He redirected each attack with the flick of a wrist, the shift of a hip. He wasn't fighting. He was guiding energy. Each time the young man attacked, Seagal let him fall into his own momentum, redirecting him to the floor, again and again with movements so small they almost looked lazy. To the untrained eye, it seemed impossible. To the martial artists watching, it was perfection. The crowd began to whisper. Some smiled in disbelief. Others just watched, mouths open, unable to process how a man barely moving could control another so completely. The challenger's breathing grew heavy. Sweat rolled down his temple. His pride screamed louder than the pain in his arms and shoulders. He rushed in again, only for Seagal to step aside, grab his GI sleeve, and sweep his legs in a motion so fluid it looked choreographed, but it wasn't. This was real. The young man hit the mat again, this time harder. The dojo winced collectively. For a long moment, Seagal didn't say a word. He stood there, composed, breathing calmly. Then he spoke unquietly, but everyone could hear. Strength without control is weakness. The challenger stayed on one knee, catching his breath. His earlier grin was gone. His friends who'd been whispering in the corner were silent now. eyes wide. A few students exchanged looks, the kind that said he had no idea what he was asking for. Still, the young black belt stood again. He couldn't stop now. Not with everyone watching. He forced a shaky smile and said, "One more?" Seagal gave a slight nod. "If you wish." The challenger bowed, and this time more respectfully. He lunged again, trying to surprise the master with a sweeping kick, but Seagal didn't even flinch. He shifted his weight, caught the leg midair, and with a soft push, sent the man tumbling backward. The dojo gasped. Seagal stepped forward slowly, extended a hand, and said calmly, "Are you done?" The young man looked up, a mix of frustration and respect on his face. He grabbed Seagal's hand and stood, rubbing his shoulder. He whispered quietly so only Seagal could hear, "I didn't think you were really that fast." Seagal looked him in the eyes. "Speed doesn't matter when your mind is still." The challenger nodded slowly. Something shifted in his expression. The fight was gone. He bowed again, deeper this time, and when he stepped back, the dojo was utterly silent. The students, still lined along the walls, stood in quiet respect. Even those who had doubted were now watching in awe. Seagal finally looked up at the crowd, his voice calm and steady. "In Aikido, we don't fight to defeat others. We fight to defeat the part of ourselves that wants to." The silence was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with understanding. Every person in that room had just witnessed something deeper than a fight. They'd seen what real mastery looked like: control, patience, humility. Have you ever seen confidence turn into fear in just seconds? Comment below and tell me which country or city you're watching from right now. Because in that Tokyo dojo, one man had just learned the most painful and most valuable lesson of his life. And yet, this was only the beginning. What happened next would test not just his body, but his pride. The dojo was still quiet, and too quiet. The young black belt stood at the edge of the mat, breathing hard. His knuckles were red, his pride bruised. Around him, the other students watched in absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Steven Seagal stood calmly in the center, hands behind his back, breathing slow, almost meditative. He wasn't tired. He wasn't even sweating. To him, the fight had already ended. But to the young black belt, it hadn't. He could still feel the eyes of every student in the room. His friends were watching. The camera was still recording. His reputation, his ego, screamed inside his chest. He clenched his fists. He wasn't ready to bow out. Not yet. He stepped forward again. "Sensei," he said, voice trembling slightly, "may I try once more?" Seagal's eyes lifted, calm, unreadable. He gave a slow nod. "The mat is yours." The challenger bowed, this time more respectfully, but inside his thoughts burned. I can't let him embarrass me again. I have to prove I'm better than this. He took a deep breath, then exploded forward, faster, harder, angrier. Every strike was sharp and precise, but filled with emotion. Seagal didn't block. He didn't resist. He simply moved. Each attack was absorbed, redirected, and dissolved in the space between them. The black belt swung a back fist. Seagal leaned aside. A kick. Seagal brushed it away with the back of his hand. Another punch. Seagal caught the wrist midair and twisted it with perfect timing. Thud. The young man hit the mat again. The impact shook through the floorboards. Gasps filled the dojo. A few students covered their mouths. They'd never seen someone thrown like that without force or effort. Seagal stepped back, motionless. "Don't fight me," he said quietly. "Fight your ego." The black belt groaned, rolling onto his side. His mind raced, half in pain, half in confusion. He'd trained for years. He was strong, fast, skilled. And yet, no matter how hard he tried, this man made him look like a beginner. He got up again, slower this time. His breathing was labored. The arrogance on his face was gone, replaced by something else. Frustration mixed with disbelief. He took another stance. His arms trembled slightly. Seagal tilted his head. "One more?" The young man nodded, swallowing hard. He charged again, but now his movements were desperate, unbalanced, filled with emotion. Seagal waited. Then with a single step forward, he redirected the man's momentum and, with almost no effort, flipped him completely over his shoulder. Thud. The mat shook. The dojo went completely silent again. Seagal turned to the crowd, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "When your heart is full of anger, your body loses its balance. He looked down at the young man, who was now sitting on the mat, chest heaving.
Martial arts, Seagal continued, is not about showing power.
It's about showing control. The black belt's eyes dropped. His breath slowed. The realization began to settle in. The students around the dojo looked at Seagal in awe. It wasn't the strength that impressed them. It was the peace. The stillness behind every move. For the first time, the challenger bowed his head in silence. His earlier smirk was gone. He wasn't ashamed and he was humbled. If you were in the challenger's place right now, would you keep fighting or would you stop and learn? Be honest. Comment below what you would do. The black belt slowly stood again, rubbing his shoulder, and said quietly, "Sensei, I don't understand. You barely touched me, but I couldn't stop falling." Seagal looked at him with that same unshakable calm. "When you fight from the mind," he said, "you rely on strength. When you fight from stillness, you use everything around you. That's Aikido." The young man nodded slowly. He looked down at the mat, then back up at Seagal, eyes wide, filled with respect. He bowed deeply, not out of formality this time, but out of genuine humility. "Thank you for the lesson." Seagal nodded back. "That's enough for today." The crowd finally exhaled. A few clapped softly. Others just stood in stunned silence. Everyone had just witnessed something rare. Not a fight, but a demonstration of mastery over ego. The young black belt stepped back to the edge of the mat, his pride gone, replaced by quiet respect. He sat down watching Seagal move on to demonstrate a new technique. Softer, slower, more graceful than before. As Seagal spoke to the class, his words carried a weight that everyone in the room would remember. A black belt is just a piece of cloth. What matters is what's underneath it, your spirit. The dojo was silent again. Not from fear this time, but from understanding. The young fighter watched, eyes wide, finally realizing this wasn't about winning at all. It was about learning to lose with dignity. And yet, as powerful as this moment was, and it wasn't the end, something even more surprising was still coming. Because soon, the world outside that dojo would find out what really happened. The tension inside the dojo had finally begun to ease. Students whispered quietly. Some were smiling, others still stunned by what they'd just seen. The young black belt sat at the back, towel around his neck, still catching his breath. His body ached, but his mind was louder than ever. He kept replaying it all, the throws, the speed, the ease with which Seagal had dismantled him. Part of him was grateful. The other part, the proud fighter inside, still whispered, "You can do better." "That wasn't your best." He looked up. Seagal was across the mat now, demonstrating with another student, showing how a simple wrist movement could neutralize a punch. His movements were slow, graceful, like a dancer who'd practiced the same rhythm for decades. The class watched in fascination. But the young black belt's heart was pounding again. That stubborn voice wouldn't stop. "You lost in front of everyone. They'll never respect you again unless you redeem yourself." He stood quietly, stretching his arm. His friend beside him whispered, "Don't do it, man. You've already proven enough." But pride has a way of silencing reason. He adjusted his belt, stepped back onto the mat, and called out, louder than before, "Sensei Seagal, may I have one final round?" The dojo froze again. The whispers stopped. Even the sound of Seagal's breathing seemed to fade into the stillness. Seagal turned his head slowly, meeting the young man's gaze. For a moment there was nothing but silence, then with a faint nod he said, "If you believe you've learned something, show me." The black belt bowed. His movements were respectful now, not arrogant, but the fire was still in his eyes. He inhaled deeply, centering himself. This time he wouldn't attack wildly. He'd use precision, timing, and awareness, just like Seagal had shown him. The two men circled each other. The air felt heavier with every second. Then the challenger moved, a fast, clean strike aimed at Seagal's shoulder. But Seagal had already vanished from that space. He stepped aside effortlessly, guiding the man's arm downward, turning his momentum against him. The black belt stumbled forward, caught off balance, and before he could blink, Seagal's hand had touched his wrist, his shoulder, and his balance disappeared completely. Thud. The impact echoed again. But this time there was something different about it. It wasn't angry. It was final. The young man lay still for a second, staring up at the ceiling, trying to process what just happened. Seagal leaned over him slightly and said softly, Control is knowing when not to fight. The words hit harder than the fall. The young fighter nodded slowly, then sat up. His voice was quiet, sincere. Sensei, I understand now. Seagal gave a small smile, almost invisible but full of approval. He extended a hand once again. This time, when the young man took it, he bowed lower than ever before. The entire dojo bowed with him. Not because they were told to, but because they felt it. They'd witnessed a transformation. The black belt was no longer challenging Seagal. He was thanking him. Have you ever learned a painful lesson that made you stronger? Tell me in the comments, and because sometimes humility teaches us more than victory ever could. As the class resumed, Seagal began speaking to everyone, not as a movie star, but as a teacher. Every time you fight with anger, you lose twice. Once in body, once in spirit. The moment you let go of ego, that's when you truly begin to learn. The words sank deep. Some students nodded quietly. Others closed their eyes, absorbing the moment. The humbled black belt stayed kneeling, watching intently. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about winning. He was listening. After class ended, Seagal approached him once more. He placed a hand gently on his shoulder. You have good spirit, he said. But remember, the greatest warriors are the calmest ones. The young man smiled faintly, eyes glassy. I'll remember that, Sensei. As Seagal walked away, the dojo filled with quiet applause. It wasn't the loud cheering kind. It was respectful, a tribute to both teacher and student. Outside, as the students left, the story began to spread. Whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into phone videos. And before the night was over, clips from that dojo had already begun circulating online. People around the world would soon see what happened, but not as a fight. They'd see it as a lesson about control, humility, and the power of stillness in a noisy, ego-driven world. The young black belt never forgot that day. He later told reporters, Steven Seagal didn't defeat me with strength. He defeated me with peace. And that line, simple, honest, profound, became the heart of what the world would soon call the day the dojo went silent. But what happened when that video went viral? Shocked even Seagal himself. The next morning, the quiet dojo was empty. The mat still marked where the fight had happened. But online, things were exploding. Someone had uploaded the footage. The video's title was simple. Black Belt challenges Steven Seagal. What happens next is unbelievable. Within hours, it had hundreds of thousands of views. By the next day, millions. The world watched, again and again, as the young fighter attacked Seagal with full force, only to be redirected and humbled with effortless precision. People paused, rewound, slowed the clip down, trying to understand how Seagal's movements were so fast, so minimal, yet so effective. The comments section flooded instantly. That's not acting, that's mastery. He didn't even break a sweat. This is the calm power that real martial arts teaches. And of course, there were the skeptics too. People who believed everything Seagal did was staged. But even they couldn't explain what they saw in that video. Because the look on that young fighter's face, the shock, the humility, the respect, and couldn't be faked. By evening, news outlets had picked it up. YouTubers were reacting to it. Martial arts forums were dissecting every move, every frame, every breath, and in the middle of all that, attention was the young man who'd started it all. He woke up to hundreds of messages on his phone, friends, strangers, journalists, even martial arts schools from other countries, reaching out. At first, he was embarrassed. His loss had gone viral. The entire world had seen him thrown to the mat over and over again. He almost wished he could disappear, but then something unexpected happened. People weren't mocking him. They were admiring him. Comments poured in, and not about his defeat, but about his courage. It takes guts to challenge a master. The way he bowed at the end, that was real respect. He learned more in 10 minutes than most people learn in a lifetime. He read those comments with tears in his eyes. For the first time, he realized that losing publicly wasn't shameful. It was human. Have you ever failed at something, only to realize later it was the best lesson you could have learned? Comment yes if you've been there, because that's exactly what this young fighter discovered. Later that week, reporters finally got to speak with him. He stood in front of the same dojo, humble and soft-spoken. "I didn't go there to disrespect Sensei Seagal," he said. "I went there to test myself. I thought I was ready. But what he taught me that day wasn't about fighting. It was about patience and peace." His words spread almost as fast as the video itself. The headlines changed tone, from "Young Fighter Challenged Seagal" to "Student Learns the True Meaning of Martial Arts." And then, Seagal himself broke his silence. During an interview in Japan, a journalist asked about the viral clip. Seagal smiled faintly, shaking his head. "He's a good student," Seagal said. "He came in with pride and left with wisdom. That's what the dojo is for." That one quote sealed the story. People began to see it not as a fight but as a teaching moment, a living demonstration of humility and mastery. The young fighter returned to training, but now everything was different. He no longer tried to hit harder or move faster. He focused on stillness, breathing, control. He began studying Aikido seriously, the very art he once doubted. Months later, he earned his instructor certification. But when his students asked him about the video, he always smiled and said, "That wasn't my worst day. That was my beginning." The viral clip, which had started as a humiliation, became a source of inspiration worldwide. Dojo after dojo began using it as a lesson in humility. Martial artists quoted Seagal's line, "Control is knowing when not to fight." Even years later, people still shared it online with captions like, "Ego lost. Respect won." That young black belt, once known for challenging Steven Seagal, became known for something far more powerful, his ability to learn. Because in the end, that's what real strength is. Not overpowering others, but overcoming yourself. And that's the truth every great fighter eventually discovers. The moment their pride hits the mat and their spirit stands taller than ever before. Final scene description. The camera fades back to the empty dojo. The same mat, the same silence. Only now that silence feels different. Not tense, not fearful, peaceful. And Seagal's voice echoes softly in memory. The loudest lessons are often taught in silence. But what Seagal told his students privately, after the dojo emptied, revealed an even deeper truth. Night had fallen over Tokyo. The dojo was quiet again, the echoes of the viral moment long gone. Only a handful of Seagal's senior students remained, quietly cleaning the tatami mats. The faint smell of incense hung in the air. Steven Seagal stood near the window gazing out into the city lights. His reflection in the glass looked calm, but behind those eyes he was thinking deeply. One of his senior black belts, a man who'd trained with him for over 20 years, finally broke the silence. "Sensei," he said softly, "the world can't stop talking about what happened yesterday." "That video is everywhere." Seagal didn't turn around. He just nodded once. "The world loves a fight," he said, "but they rarely understand what it's really about." He finally turned, walking slowly to the center of the dojo. His students gathered around him, sitting on their knees in silence. "They see me throw a man," Seagal continued, "but they don't see the lesson in the fall." He paused, letting his words settle in the air. "That young man wasn't my enemy. He was my mirror." The students looked at each other, unsure what he meant. Seagal continued, "When I was his age, I was full of the same fire, pride, confidence, ego. I wanted to prove I was unstoppable. But the truth is," he looked down, his voice softening, "ego blinds the warrior long before the enemy ever can." One student bowed his head and whispered, "Sensei." He looked broken when he left. "Did you mean to humble him?" Seagal shook his head slowly. "No, I meant to wake him." The room fell into silence again. You could hear the faint hum of the streetlights outside. "When a man challenges you," Seagal said, "it's not always for victory. Sometimes it's a cry for understanding." He wanted to know if what he saw in the movies was real, and he found out something more real than technique. He found truth. He turned to one of the younger students, who looked nervous. "Tell me," Seagal said, "what is the purpose of martial arts?" The student hesitated, then said softly, "To protect, Sensei." Seagal smiled faintly. "Yes, but not just to protect others. To protect yourself from the anger inside you." He looked around the room. Every student was silent, hanging on every word. "The greatest fight," Seagal said, "is not on the mat. It's in the heart." The day you stop fighting your ego is the day you truly master yourself. Do you agree with Seagal? That ego is the real enemy? Type yes in the comments if you believe true strength comes from peace, not pride. He walked slowly to the edge of the mat and sat down with his students. His tone softened even more, like a father speaking to his children. When the world saw that video, he said, they saw power. But real power isn't in the throw. It's in the restraint. The decision not to destroy what you could easily break. He looked up at the dojo ceiling. The same ceiling that had watched countless students rise and fall. That young man reminded me of myself, he said. Because I too once thought fighting was about domination. But one day an old master showed me. It's about harmony. One student asked quietly, will you train him again, sensei? Seagal smiled gently. If he comes back, yes. Because now, he's ready to learn. Outside, the sound of rain began tapping softly against the windows. The dojo lights reflected on the wet pavement, calm, golden still. Seagal stood once more, facing his students with that same commanding serenity. The world is noisy, he said. Everyone wants to prove something. But a true martial artist has nothing to prove. He already knows who he is. He bowed deeply, and every student bowed in return. In that quiet moment, something sacred filled the room, not fame, not fear, but respect. And as Seagal turned off the lights and stepped outside, his final words lingered like an echo in the dark. One day the world will realize, silence is the sound of mastery. The camera fades to the empty dojo once again, the same space where pride fell and wisdom rose. The rain continues to fall outside, washing the night clean, and somewhere across the city, the young black belt, the one who once fought with ego, is on his knees in meditation, remembering the lesson that changed his life. He doesn't need to prove himself anymore, because now he understands the loudest victories are the ones that make no sound at all. But what Seagal didn't expect was how this story would transform into a global movement for martial arts respect. Weeks passed, then months. The video didn't fade, it grew. Clips from the dojo appeared on every platform in every language. Martial artists from Brazil to the Philippines, from Canada to Kenya, were sharing it, not as entertainment, but as enlightenment. Dojo masters began showing it to their students. Parents showed it to their kids. Teachers used it as an example of humility, patience, and emotional control. And at the center of it all were two men, a master who had nothing left to prove, and a student who had finally learned what proving himself really meant. The young black belt's life changed completely. He wasn't chasing validation anymore. He didn't brag, didn't argue online, didn't seek praise. Instead, he started teaching kids the same lessons Seagal had shown him. He told them, the fight is never against someone else. It's always against your own pride. And across the ocean, Steven Seagal continued to teach quietly in his Tokyo dojo, just as he had for years. He didn't post about the fame, didn't comment on the hype. He simply kept showing up, bowing, training, and guiding others to stillness. Until one morning, a familiar figure walked through the dojo doors. The young black belt had returned. He was different now. Calm, composed, eyes clear. He bowed deeply before Seagal. Sensei, he said, I came back, not to fight, but to thank you. For a moment, Seagal said nothing. He simply smiled and gestured for him to join the class. As the session went on, Seagal called the young man to the mat. Together, they demonstrated balance, flow, redirection, not as opponents, but as partners. There was no force, no pride, only harmony. The students watching could feel it, that this wasn't just a lesson in technique. It was a lesson in life. When the class ended, Seagal placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and said softly, You've learned the hardest move of all, letting go. The young fighter bowed once more, eyes wet with emotion. He whispered, Thank you for throwing me down that day, because that's how I finally learned to stand up. Seagal smiled faintly. That's what real martial arts is for. Soft music plays as clips flash across the screen. Children in dojos training. Teachers explaining humility. People meditating. Communities sharing the viral story as inspiration. The young man opens his own dojo. A small, humble place with a simple banner on the wall that reads, Respect before power. And underneath it, A quote from Steven Seagal himself. Control is knowing when not to fight. That phrase became a movement. Millions began using the hashtag respect before power, turning one viral moment into a message that united martial artists around the world. Final narration. In the end, what started as a challenge became a lesson. What began as pride ended as peace. And what could have been just another viral fight became a symbol of respect, discipline, and the true spirit of martial arts. Because real strength isn't in the strike. It's in the silence after it. If you believe no one should be judged by ego, by appearance, or by pride, type respect in the comments. And subscribe for more true stories that prove humility is the greatest power of all. The dojo lights dim. The mat gleams softly under the moonlight. And for the last time, the voice of Seagal echoes. A true warrior leaves no scars, only lessons.